Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing great. I'm so glad you're here and I'm excited to share this bike frame restoration journey with you today. You know, sometimes the things that bother us the most are the ones staring right back at us. And that's exactly what happened with my bike frame's main tube. Those scratches weren't just minor cosmetic issues. They were deep, they were visible, and honestly, they bothered me every single time I looked at my bike. The chips and gouges in the paint seemed to multiply in my mind each day, and I knew I had to do something about it. I wasn't going to accept a bike that didn't feel complete, that didn't feel like mine anymore. So I did what anyone in the digital age does. I turned to YouTube. I watched video after video, soaking in techniques, learning about grip progression, understanding patience and process. The consensus was clear. This restoration would require a methodical approach, starting rough and gradually refining until perfection emerged. And that's when I decided to take action. I pulled out my sandpaper collection and started with 220 grit. Now, if you've never sanded a bike frame before, let me tell you, it's meditative and exhausting at the same time. The repetitive motion, the sound of sandpaper against metal, the gradual transformation of the surface. I didn't rush it. I let the 220 grit do its job, slowly revealing the underlying layers, breaking down the damaged paint and those awful scratches that had been haunting me. With each pass, I could feel the frame responding to my work. The deep chips that seemed so permanent started to become less pronounced. The scratches that bothered me began to blur and fade into a uniform surface. It was working. The process was actually working. Once I was satisfied with the 220 grit work, I thought I was ready for the next phase, filling those chip holes with epoxy resin. I'd watched the videos. I knew the concept. How hard could it be? Turns out, harder than I thought. In my enthusiasm, or maybe my overconfidence, I applied too much epoxy resin. Way too much. And just like that, it went everywhere. It covered more of the frame than intended, and as it started to dry, I realized I'd made a mess of things. That night, I went to bed with a sinking feeling, staring at this blob of hardened epoxy that didn't belong there. But here's the thing about restoration work. Mistakes aren't disasters, they're just obstacles. And obstacles can be overcome with patience and careful technique. When I woke up the next morning and saw that hardened mess in the daylight, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't frustrated. Because I knew that sandpaper could fix this. I knew that enough careful work would bring me back to where I needed to be. So I did exactly that. I went back to 220 grit and started sanding again. The excess epoxy came off. The over-ambitious applications slowly surrendered to my steady, deliberate work. And as the surface smoothed out, I felt this strange sense of calm. Every stroke of the sandpaper was teaching me something. Every grain of dust falling away was progress. Once the 220 grit had done its job a second time, I moved to 400 grit. The surface was getting finer now, smoother, more refined. And then, this is where things really started to shine. I graduated to wet sanding starting at 600 grit. Wet sanding is beautiful. There's something almost satisfying about it. The water keeps the paper fresh, prevents clogging, and lets you see the frame emerge as if it's being born anew. I started at 600, moved through the grits progressively, watching the surface become increasingly perfect under my hands. The scratches were disappearing. The damage that had bothered me so much was becoming nothing more than a memory. And then came the final piece of this puzzle, a tool I never thought I'd use. 10 years ago, my friend gave me a small buffing machine. It was a thoughtful gift, but honestly, I'd never found a real use for it. So it sat in my collection of tools, gathering dust, waiting for its moment. I'd kept it all this time, never throwing it away, maybe on some subconscious level, knowing that someday I'd need it. Today was that day. I fired up that decade-old buffing machine, and something magical happened. The final layer of imperfection, the last hints of sanding marks and minor damage, they all melted away under the gentle rotation of that buffer. It was like watching a sculptor reveal the perfect form hidden within the stone. My bike frame transformed before my eyes. The scratches were gone. The deep chips that had bothered me so much were nothing but a distant worry. The frame gleamed with a uniform, refined finish that made me genuinely proud. There's one small spot where I'd sanded perhaps just a touch too much. But you know what? It's the perfect canvas for a specialised bike logo that I've been wanting to add anyway. It's not a flaw, it's an opportunity. Looking at my bike frame now, I don't see damage or imperfection. I see a journey. I see patience, learning and persistence. I see what happens when you're willing to invest time and care into something you love. I see a restoration that's so much more than cosmetic, it's personal. And I'm genuinely happy with the result. Not just the frame itself, but everything this process taught me about restoration. About not giving up when things go wrong. About trusting the process even when you're learning as you go. Sometimes the best projects aren't the ones that go perfectly from start to finish. They're the ones where you overcome obstacles, where you learn, where you adapt. And as I look at my restored bike frame now, I'm reminded that with the right technique, the right patience, and maybe even a tool you've been holding onto for 10 years, you can transform anything into something you're proud of. This is restoration at its finest. Not just bringing something back to life, but making it truly yours in the process. Thank you so much for watching and being part of this journey with me. Your support means everything. If you enjoyed this restoration, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want to follow along as I continue this adventure and tackle new projects, please subscribe. New videos are coming, and I'd love to have you with me every step of the way.